Okay, we are now live. So I'm David Dennis. Will be playing the short role of host for this webinar. I happen to be VP of Marketing at Bitnami, and I also have Ben with us, who is the VP of Product at DreamFactory. Go ahead and say hi, Ben.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be on today's webinar.
Great, thanks, Ben. And moving forward into it, we'll go over our agenda real quickly here. It's going to be pretty straightforward. First, we're just going to have a quick little one slide, really, talking about Bitnami and the DreamFactory partnership. And then Ben's going to get into an overview of DreamFactory itself. Then we're going to have a demo, which will really be, the bulk of the meat of the webinar. And then lastly, there will be a Q&A session at the end. So just to give you a little background, DreamFactory is a Bitnami ISV partner. So Bitnami has a very large application of about 150 open source applications, but we also have relationships with companies like DreamFactory that have, both open source and paid offerings. Bitnami is included in, or rather, DreamFactory is included in the Bitnami Cloud Application Catalog, which means it appears on every cloud where the Bitnami App Catalog appears. So it's on Oracle, but it's also on Azure from Microsoft, Amazon, and of course Google Cloud as well. But today's focus will be on the Oracle Cloud, and we'll be talking a lot about how to connect to basically various Oracle database services and databases to DreamFactory. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand everything over to Ben.
All right. Thank you, David. My name is Ben Bussey. I'm the head of product management at DreamFactory. Welcome to today's webinar. We're really excited to have everyone on and talk about DreamFactory, talk about how we work with Bitnami, and then obviously talk about our integration with Oracle. So what I'm going to do is kind of provide some context for everybody about what DreamFactory is and the purpose of it before jumping into the demo. And really at the heart of it, one of the big transitions that's happened is that companies out there obviously want to, API enable their businesses. So there's this big transition that's undergoing now in the market, where you have this move from a kind of a legacy, what we call a legacy stack, so kind of web-based applications using large app servers and primarily SQL databases on the back end, to this transition to what we term kind of a modern stack, meaning that you're API enabling all sorts of data sources on the back end with REST APIs. And then on the front end, you have obviously a lot more than just web applications these days. You've got mobile applications, and of course, the Internet of Things is a nascent market, but obviously growing very quickly. So the point of all this is that this transition is happening. It's happening quickly, and as a business, any business really has to think about this and start moving in that direction. So the challenge with this, and a little bit of background on DreamFactory. DreamFactory started as an ISV, a software vendor. We've been doing software development ourselves, building applications for many, many years. And when you move to this API approach, one of the really big challenges is that using REST APIs or API enabling anything is a really hard process. There's a ton of complexity, and kind of the way that works today is your APIs are tightly wedded or tightly coupled to the applications that you're building. So you build applications, you build APIs, you deploy them to production, and then when you build another application, a new one, you're typically not able to reuse those APIs and reuse all of that work. So you're building one-off APIs, and it's extremely complex and really, really time-consuming. And has numerous other problems as well. So our strong belief is that building new REST APIs for every project is simply a bad idea. And so that's what we're talking about today in the demo. One other thing I want to point out, one of the other big challenges development-wise, and we've seen this in our own company, is that the front-end team and the back-end team, there's a lot of back and forth. We call this the ping-pong effect of designing, building APIs, and then requirements are constantly changing. So the point of this is simply that integration is a really big part of the development lifecycle, very time-consuming. So with that background context and the problem, DreamFactory set out about 3 years ago to solve this. We took a bunch of technology that we built internally and we open sourced it. And what we believe is there's a much better way to provide REST APIs for any application that you're building. We built what we call an API platform. It's a runtime API middleware. You install it in the cloud on a server or on your laptop. And today we're going to be showing it deployed on Oracle Cloud. And what it does is 3 key things. It auto-generates REST APIs, meaning that you don't have to write a REST API for your, say, your Oracle database. It provides scripting, so you can customize the API endpoints. We'll talk about that in the demo. And that provides a full-blown security controls, so user management and session handling and many other features. So that's what we're going to be covering today in the demo. The way that we've done this, kind of the how we've done it, is with what we call a platform approach. DreamFactory really provides a bunch of different REST API endpoints. It automatically generates them for SQL databases such as Oracle. There are 45 abstract endpoints with a lot of power behind it. So everything is parameterized. Basically, DreamFactory interrogates your schema, auto-generates REST API endpoints, and provides a parameter-driven approach to pretty much everything that you would need to do to build sophisticated applications using SQL or using Oracle SQL on the back end. The other thing that I'm going to demo today is really quickly mention is a lot of times, obviously, you have a schema, you have your production database deployed, and you have to do sophisticated joins between multiple tables in the same database that may not have foreign key relationships or else completely different databases. So DreamFactory supports really sophisticated orchestration with writing code, and I'm going to cover that in the demo today. So wrapping up the slides, I just want to reiterate the point of API automation as a concept is really at the business levels is to reduce your costs, so it reduces the development complexity, make you a lot more agile, so you can install software such as DreamFactory and decouple the front end from the back end, just have REST APIs that you can use. From a portability perspective, you can move your apps between basically any server. You're not limited to one type of server you can use. You can run it on premises or in the cloud or both, any combination thereof. And then from an IT perspective, the benefits are numerous. You're standardizing all of your APIs, so you have a consistent API platform. By doing this consolidation, you have security, so you don't have multiple different teams and different technologies building APIs. You're consolidating everything from a security perspective. And of course, this is important for compliance and governance, especially for large enterprise companies. So that's it on the slides, just providing a little bit of background. I'm going to go ahead and jump into a demo. So this is the front-end DreamFactory application, and this is what I'm going to demo today. I'm going to cover a couple key areas. I'm going to show, first of all, how you connect to Oracle. I'm going to talk about the API docs and how you actually use the API, the live API for Oracle. Talk a little bit about scripting. I'll cover the foreign key, the virtual foreign key concept very briefly. And then I'll wrap up with a little bit of discussion on security. I'll talk about role-based access control, and I'll talk about how you actually integrate DreamFactory into a DevOps process. So a little bit of background, just to reiterate, DreamFactory is a runtime platform. You can think of it basically as a LAMP stack. So it comes on the Bitnami stack. It comes with a web server built in. You can use Nginx. You can use Apache. It comes with a default database, which is used to govern various parts of the system, such as user management. The nice thing about it is Bitnami provides all of these cloud installers. So what I'm showing today, this is DreamFactory running on Oracle Cloud. So you can go to Bitnami and you can see all of the different deployment options there. There are numerous ones that you can use and try out and also run in production. The other thing that I want to mention, which is important, is what I'm going to show today is the Oracle integration. So DreamFactory as a project is an Apache open source project. So you can go get it, you can try it, you can use it in production for free. However, some of the integrations, some of the drivers such as Oracle are actually commercial. So those are paid for features. Bitnami also packages our commercial product, and you can contact us and you can actually trial the commercial system to get it up and running with your own Oracle database before purchasing it. So I just want to be clear about which parts are open source and which parts are commercial. So let me hop into the demo. The first thing you'll see is that this is basically as an administrator, the user interface that you use to configure everything. So I'm logged in as an admin. You'll see a bunch of tabs across the top, apps, users, roles, services, etc. Everything that I'm doing in the user interface is itself a REST API. So this is really powerful because you can programmatically do any action from outside of the DreamFactory user interface if you want. And this comes into play when you're using, for example, packages for your deployment of apps and schema and services and so forth. So you can run multiple applications. Here, applications, when you create one, there are actually a bunch of import options. So I recommend this if you're just starting out. You can go get these applications and just import them from GitHub to see them in action and start to learn about how to actually build applications. When you create an application, you put in a name, description. You can run your applications on a different server. You can enable cores, basically. You can run it natively in DreamFactory. It's a web app, so DreamFactory has its own file system. You can also run it without any storage at all. So if you're building an iOS application, for example, you just run your application on the client and then call DreamFactory's REST API endpoints. So each application has an API key. That's important for security. And then there are a bunch of sample apps that you can get as well, which I mentioned before in the import. So let's say that you want to connect to your Oracle database. So you have an app, you created it, you have an API key in DreamFactory. DreamFactory makes it really, really easy. At the heart of it, it's all about automating your APIs. So you can connect to a lot of different data sources. Today we're going to be talking about Oracle. There are many other ones as well. You've got file storage. DreamFactory autogens an API for that. Email, push notifications. You can hook up remote services. So if you have your own HTTP REST API, you can hook that in, or you can also hook up SOAP services. So DreamFactory translates SOAP WSDLs into REST endpoints as well automatically. You can write custom APIs in different programming languages here if you need to do that, but most APIs will be auto-generated, obviously. There's OAuth hooks for different OAuth providers, LDAP, for enterprise integration, Logstash for logging, and then cache services like for Memcache and Redis, full auto-generated REST APIs for all of these things. So hooking up an Oracle database is really, really easy. It really consists of just several very simple steps. The first is you put in a name for your API. I've called mine Oracle. Give it a label and a quick description. It really supports a whole bunch of different Oracle databases. So 10, 11, and 12 are supported and well tested. You can run your Oracle database on premises and connect to it that way. Basically, DreamFactory securely stores your credentials and proxies in to that database. Here I'm actually using Oracle Database as a Service, so Oracle DBaaS, which is running in the Oracle Cloud. So DreamFactory itself is installed on the Oracle Cloud, and the database itself that we're connecting to is also Database as a Service running in the Oracle Cloud. But you can run your Oracle database anywhere. It can be running in any cloud, on premises. It doesn't really matter. DreamFactory is proxying in. So it can be in a completely different server than DreamFactory is running on. So very simple. There are a bunch of options for connectivity. The minimal things that you need are a host, a port number, the name of the database, and the credentials for that database. So as I mentioned, DreamFactory is storing those credentials. It's also inheriting the security permissions of that particular user that you enter here. You can use the default schema, and then there are a bunch of various connection string options, driver attributes, basically key value pairs of things that you can add there if you need to. So that's all it is to connect. There's a service definition. So DreamFactory uses basically Swagger, which is a great technology for documenting APIs, and that's what we use under the hood to generate our API docs. So basically any API that you create has a Swagger definition. The key thing though is DreamFactory is auto-generating this Swagger definition based on the connection to your database. So literally it's generating these endpoints, it's looking at the schema, and it's providing a runtime layer that translates a REST API call into a query that will go to that database and return a JSON array back to your client application. So that's all there is to it in terms of the connections. You can literally see that just takes a few seconds if you know the credentials and everything for your Oracle database. So the next thing is once you've connected to that database, you can start to interact with the API docs. So everything that you've connected in the services here shows up as a REST API. And I mentioned in my slides there are 45 abstract endpoints. The coverage on that is significant. So it covers schema, what we call metadata. So you can operate on Oracle schema using the API. You can obviously do create, read, update, delete operations on single records and on multiple records, and it supports all sorts of functionality there. And I'll quickly demo some of the capabilities so everyone kind of understands the key construct. The other thing that it supports is with the API natively, it supports foreign key joins, and I'll show that with the foreign keys that you have in your schema. It also supports much more sophisticated querying. So if you've written, if you have, say, existing stored procedures in your Oracle database that you want to use, you can just call those stored procedures, and you can you can pass in the parameters that those stored procedures require, and they will return JSON back via the API. Triggers and functions are also supported. So there's a lot there. Now, the question naturally is, well, how can you do so much with so few endpoints? And the way that DreamFactory has implemented this and the key thing is this idea of reusability. So instead of thinking about application development from the API development from the perspective of, okay, what's the app functionality, you can actually invert the problem and say, well, what is the data that I need to return generically for a broad set of application functionality? And then how does an API actually deliver that? So this model is built off of years and years of our own development. We were one of the earliest Salesforce.com partners on the Force.com platform. A lot of our thinking came out of our own development there. And so the way it works is you have parameterized endpoints. So you can pass in any table into a query and just run an API call. And then it will return, basically it'll form a request. So you can see the curl request here. And it's just following the root path of the instance here, my IP address here where DreamFactory is running. API, we're on version 2 of the DreamFactory API. The API name, and then underscore table for the type of API call we're making, and then obviously the entity returned. So that's a very elementary API call. But what the power of it is really in how you can take the parameters that are provided and do very sophisticated queries. So one thing, just to show an example, perhaps we want to pull in all of the related records that are joined by foreign key relationships, and we want to limit the results to just 10 records, and maybe we want to do some offset for pagination or something like that. So we can rerun our query here from the API docs, and then what happens is the query is just reformed. So you see how it just got updated here. And we're passing in after the question mark a bunch of key value pairs. So we want everything that's related, and we want to pass a limit of 10. And then that's going to wrap that query in a resource array, basically a JSON resource array, return a bunch of records. So we have contact information. We have the contact groups that these particular contacts belong to. And then we have various ways of contacting them. Basically, this is a junction object or a many-to-many foreign key relationship where we have different ways of contacting these individuals. So that's as simple as it is. Obviously, you can go in both directions. So I'm doing get calls on here, but you can post these relationships or update the relationships back. And then you can obviously do more sophisticated things. So you want to run a simple query. If you understand SQL, if you've written SQL queries, then it's the same thing. So DreamFactory honors basically SQL syntax. So you can put in filters, and maybe we want to order. We want to do a sort order. So we want to sort these by first name. And so the idea is very simple. You can put in all of these parameters, and I'll just mention some of the other ones. You can pass in specific fields that you want. You generally don't want to get all of the fields. You can do offsets, which are really important for pagination. You can do aggregation, so sum, min, max, count, etc. You can return the counts if you want. You can include the schema with your request. You can pass in specific IDs that you want, or ID fields, or ID types. And you can also do things like continue and rollback. So if you're doing a composite, post or something with multiple related records back, you can roll back if the insertion doesn't happen as desired. So here I'll just try that out again, and you can see how these are built up. So this is just passing in some more key value pairs, passing in the query, and then providing the order or the sort order back. Now, in the curl request, you'll see how this full request goes over the server. So I have a secure session. I'm actually authenticated into DreamFactory. DreamFactory is completely stateless. So it uses JSON web tokens under the hood to initiate the request and the response to and from the server. So you'll see a header. You'll see the API key. So the API key is what I mentioned before in the app. So you have to have a valid API key. This will make more sense when you see the security model, which I'll get to in a moment. And then you have a session token, which is a long string, which is basically the JSON web token, followed by the actual API call. So that's the API in a nutshell. That's the idea. A small number of endpoints that are simple, easy to understand, very compact, but a lot of power. So you have 45 of them, and then if you have 1,000 different tables in your database, you have a multiplier factor. You have 4,500 endpoints ready to use on that complete Oracle database, and then all of these parameters to do very sophisticated API calls. So the next thing I'm going to jump to real quickly is the concept of what we call the virtual foreign key. So this is the idea that it should be really easy to connect data that's in different databases. So you'll notice here that I've connected to multiple different databases. We're talking about Oracle here, so I'm going to move to my Oracle database. And the use case here, let's say, is that I have, it could be 2 different tables in Oracle that are not connected at all by foreign key, but we want to make a relationship, and we don't want to have to go to the DBA. Maybe this is a production database. We actually want to encapsulate that relationship in the middleware itself without writing a bunch of orchestration code. So that's one use case. Another use case is that you have disparate databases. Maybe you have a NoSQL database like a MongoDB or another type of SQL database, and you want to actually get information that's from Oracle, but that also comes from a different database. So you have different, billing information in a different database. You want to go and fetch that. So DreamFactory makes it really easy to do that. The way you do it is basically you can inspect the schema of any connected database. So here in our simple example, we've got a contact table with some information about the table, and you can also update the schema through this interface. But what we want to do is just provide a simple example of how you can kind of instantiate a virtual foreign key relationship. And the way you do that is, say, for example, that you wanted to, you had an optional field, let's say in your database, you were gathering social media data, let's say about Twitter handles of people. And so it's an optional field. It may not be in the data, but you have that Twitter handle in multiple databases, and you want to join and see, what information comes back from these 2 different databases. So you can go to the field in Oracle, let's say, that has the Twitter handle, and then you can say that you want to make this a foreign key. You can check the virtual foreign key option, and then you can also select what we call a foreign service, meaning that it's completely outside of Oracle. And so what we do there is we just select our virtual foreign service. Maybe that information's in another SQL database, and we can go to the table in that different SQL database and then select the field that we want to impose this virtual foreign key relationship. Again, this isn't obviously doing it at the database level, so it's not going to create a foreign key all of a sudden on your schema. It's not touching your schema. It's just creating this virtual relationship in the DreamFactory environment at the middleware layer. And that's all you do to create that. So if I save this, I have a new foreign key relationship. And then as you saw there in the API docs with the related parameter, I can simply add that virtual foreign key as a related field. And then it's going to pull back with one API call. It's going to pull back the data from 2 different databases. And again, I haven't written any source code or had to program any of this. It's just pure configuration. So that's a really powerful feature and one that we like to showcase a lot. So moving right along, I want to cover a few more important concepts. At its heart, DreamFactory is providing the API for Oracle and other data sources as well. But often you want to actually configure or write source code, not really configure. You want to actually do something on the request of an API call or on the response of an API call. So what DreamFactory does there are 2 types of scripts that you can write. There are custom scripts, which I showed earlier in the Services tab. The idea there is you could write a custom API to do anything. You can use JavaScript or Python or PHP or run a Node.js server. There's also a construct of event scripts. You can think of these as essentially webhooks. So you have all of the endpoints, and let me just step back here so everyone can see. All of the endpoints are exposed. So if you go to Mongo, you'll see all of the Mongo API endpoints. If you go to Oracle, you'll see a bunch of Oracle endpoints, and they're on all of the key capabilities of the API. So on stored procedures and functions, schema, and tables. And you can drill down to any of these endpoints, and you can just write simple logic. So an example is, let's say that an obvious use case is just doing server-side field validation, right? You validate on the client, but you should definitely validate on the server to make sure that the information coming in isn't garbage. So what you can do is you can just select different programming languages. Here, DreamFactory, again, I should mention, comes built in natively. It has the V8 JavaScript engine, so you can run JavaScript code natively in DreamFactory. You can also use Node.js, run Node.js server on parallel with DreamFactory, or you can use PHP or Python as well. So what you can do here is just go to that endpoint and then write a little bit of code. So say you just want to validate the fields coming in from the JSON payload and do a field validation, like the first name can't be empty or something simple like that. You can just write a little routine here, and then the API will be intercepted by the code. It will check that logic, and then it will return whatever you want to return to the API call. In this case, it will not insert those records and return a 200 unless this rule is true. So it's going to check and make sure that the name of everything in the payload is not empty. Likewise, on the response, you can do all sorts of lightweight orchestration or like workflows, which is another great use case. So you may have conditions where some event occurs, the API call does what it does, and then you want to do something. Maybe send an email, send a Twilio SNS message, or it could be really anything. Those are some simple examples. The important things I want to point out here, a couple things. One is that the platform.api.post is a native API call, so you can call any endpoint that is in DreamFactory from these server-side scripts. You can also bring in different libraries, so scripts can call other scripts. You can bring in libraries like Lodash or various other libraries that you want and reference those in your scripts. And then you can also call APIs that are outside of DreamFactory. So it's not necessarily that all the APIs have to be in DreamFactory, but the idea behind an API platform is that you have much greater security and control if things are inside of DreamFactory. So here we're calling the Amazon SNS, so simple notification service with a topic endpoint. So anyone subscribing to this topic will get this message that a new contact was created. This is a trivial example. You can imagine you can have all sorts of conditions where if various conditions are true, then you send a particular type of push notification or email, whereas if other conditions are true, then you set a different workflow rule, and you can encapsulate all of that logic inside of a server-side script. So that's kind of scripts in a nutshell, very high level. A couple quick examples there. So that's the second part. So API automation first, then scripts running on top of those APIs. The other thing is that DreamFactory has a bunch of security features that are built in. I mentioned JSON Web Tokens, but the idea behind that is you have administrators, so these are folks who can configure the system. There are users, so users are basically end users, and these users can be created through the API, or they can be created in DreamFactory itself, but users obviously have an API, so you can self-register users through your application through the API. And then roles. And roles are really important because roles really govern the role-based access control of table data and record data in the Oracle context. So an example of this is, let's say in our simple address book application, we were looking at the APIs there, we can have multiple roles. So each application can have more than one role. And roles really govern the access permissions on the actual data. So if you look in these list boxes here, you've got all of the different APIs there. And we don't want to expose everything. We may have hundreds of APIs in here. We just want to expose a subset of the APIs to particular users for a particular application. And this is where we do that. So all of the components, basically the schema, the tables, the stored procedures, the functions, are all just endpoints. They're parts of the API that can be called or not called. And then you can impose access control, basically HTTP verbs, on all of those different component endpoints. So this is essentially saying, open up these 4 tables to marketing users for this address book application. And in most cases, you're just going to expose the API. In other cases, you might want to expose a server-side script as well. And you can do this both either or none. So the script that you saw, that field validation script, is running on the contact endpoint in Oracle. So we want to enable that script to run when this particular role calls that endpoint. If we disabled this, then the script wouldn't be able to be run from this particular role. You can also do record level access control. So you can basically say that for a given table, you want to only allow certain records to be operated upon by this particular role. The classic, simplest example is if you have an owner on the table, then you want to ensure that that owner is only the person who's authenticated and making API calls through DreamFactory by user ID. So that, for example, I couldn't authenticate and then create, read, update, and delete other people's records, basically where I'm not the owner. And you can do intersections or unions on your records there. You can also implement column-level security, and that's really, really easy to do with server-side scripting. We wanted to make this user interface fairly simple and straightforward and compact. But when you need to strip out columns, you can easily do that on the response coming back from the API. So that's pretty easy to do. So we're running at a half an hour. I just want to show one other quick thing. and then we can wrap up with a little bit of Q&A. So now that you've configured all of these things and you have your application running, and maybe you're running on localhost, and now you want to push, let's say, all of the schema, your services, the data, the users, everything, you need to push that to a QA server, or maybe you've got everything working on your QA server and you want to move it to production. So the way you do that is with timed out here. The way you do that is with an idea called packages. And what packages are is basically, in a nutshell, the idea here is that you can, let me just run back here. You can basically export and import packages. And packages are everything that you've configured. So it's all of the metadata as well as the actual data. And it has a manifest file, which basically governs everything that you've exported. So these are really important. You can put them in source code control repositories. You can use them as a REST API. So a simple example is, you've got all of these systems. Maybe you want to bring out all of the roles. You can select all of these, and you can basically build up packages of information that you want to then export to a file. So these will get exported to the file system. You can also download them and push them to, say, GitHub or some other source code repository. And you can add as many of these things as you need to add. So if you're adding, maybe there's some of the system APIs that you need. We call these services. So you want to bring in the files, and you want to bring in other APIs like this database here. You just add these to the package, and then you export all of this information. And then you can move it around from development to test to production. And then obviously you can import packages. So if you were running on a production server, like here I'm on Oracle, and then I want to import a package, I just simply bring that package from my desktop or from GitHub or some other source code control repository and put them in, and you can password protect them and so forth. So that's kind of the 20-minute overview of DreamFactory. We covered a lot of ground. So hopefully this is helpful to everyone. As I mentioned, just want to reiterate, the Oracle connector is not open source, but you can easily try it out for free. And you can contact us. Our website's dreamfactory.com, and get in touch with us, and we can help you get up and running with DreamFactory in Oracle. So that's it.
Thanks, Ben. We do have some questions from the audience. So for those of you who didn't hear the intro earlier, go ahead and type your questions into the chat window box, and then we'll read them out to the audience as a whole. So, okay, going through the list of questions we got here. Does DreamFactory support big data or NoSQL connection sources?
It does, yeah.
Oh, hold on. We muted you, or you muted yourself. Okay, one minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, so great question. We do. We provide a lot of different data connectivity. So on the SQL front, there's Oracle, that I mentioned. There are a bunch of other SQL databases such as DB2 and SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, et cetera. Then on the NoSQL side, we've done a lot of development there. NoSQL turns out, especially we see a lot in mobile use cases frequently used, as well as obviously kind of more sort of big data, so to speak, oriented use cases. So a lot of support there. We support the popular ones are really MongoDB. We support CouchDB, Azure Table, DynamoDB from Amazon. We just added Cassandra as well. And we're going to be adding quite a few more in the future, like we're about to support Microsoft's Document DB, and there will be Couchbases around the corner as well. So there are a bunch of different NoSQL databases. Redis is another good one, not necessarily NoSQL so much, but just key value stores. That one's really been popular as well. So we're really, if you think about it, we're trying to cover automated APIs for just about any data source where it's something contained on a server that you need to call with an API. So that's the direction we're headed.
Great. Okay, and there's a closely related next question, which is, can I use a DreamFactory SQL syntax if the database is NoSQL?
Great question. The answer is yes. We've invested, actually a lot of the investment in the middleware has gone into abstractions, and I didn't have time to cover a lot of this, but let me just try to articulate how it works. The Oracle endpoints that you saw work the same way for any database. So if it's a different SQL database, it's going to be the same types of endpoints, the exact same functionality. There are cases when databases have additional functionality that are unique to that database, and we try to support most of that. For example, Oracle packages we're working on now, so that's something that's specific to Oracle that isn't specific to other databases. But for the most part, they work identically. And then for NoSQL, the endpoints are again the same, except it's a little bit of a subset because you don't have foreign key relationships, so you're not using that construct. But everything else is really the same. I mean, you don't have stored procedures and things like that, but it's a direct subset. And once you've understood the SQL API, the NoSQL API is exactly the same. You can make the exact same SQL calls. You can also use the NoSQL specific syntax. So if it's MongoDB, you can use bson and attach that to the API call, or else you can just use a simple SQL query and it will totally work. So that's one of the advantages. We've abstracted it so that you can write your application and just use any database, really, on the back end. It's totally portable.
Great. Next question is, let me read it here. Okay. What size of instance do I need to run DreamFactory?
So that's a good question. I would point you to some of the scalability blog posts. If you go to blog.dreamfactory.com, you can see some of the benchmarking that we've done. Just to give you an example, what we generally recommend is if it's a pretty small application, you can obviously run small. The type of performance that we try to achieve is, you want to have your API calls returning in, sub 500 millisecond range, ideally more like 300 or 400. So it's a LAMP stack. So it's no different than scaling up horizontally or vertically if you were, doing a traditional web application. So from a scaling perspective, you just need to look at the load that, number of API calls you expect per second, the variability, kind of the standard deviation of those API calls through time. You can also use Docker packages to dynamically scale up and down. So that's another really important capability. But in general, if you want to look at it, start small, look at your performance, and then think about the load and the type of measurement, number of users, but what's more important is the API calls per second that you think you need to handle and whether you need to load balance that, et cetera. So kind of high-level answer. But contact us if you want to learn more about the details of some of the metrics that we've been working on with benchmarking.
Great. Okay. The next one, let me try to interpret this here. If I need to connect to two different databases or data sources, what's the best practice for that?
Yeah, so two different databases. Those are, when we think of database connections, we think of them as different APIs. So you just, in the DreamFactory world, you have a database and you want to connect to that database. So if you have an Oracle server and you have three different databases, those are going to be three different APIs in DreamFactory. So you see three different things in the list, three different API names. And that keeps it really straightforward and simple from an API perspective. Now, the virtual foreign key concept lets you marry those databases at runtime. You can connect them and make API calls. And the important thing there is you can do that without, number one, without changing your schema, and number two, without writing code. If you just use the features out of the box. Now, you can also use scripting to connect those APIs if you have more sophisticated use cases where a simple virtual foreign key join won't work. Maybe you need to manipulate data that's returned, process it, and then make another API call. And that's where scripting opens up tons of possibilities. But the way you should do it is to differentiate your databases at the API level. And that part of that goes back to the kind of the API spaghetti slide that I showed in the beginning, which is having a big monolithic API with thousands of endpoints to different databases is really, really hard and confusing and just doesn't scale from a human perspective.
Okay, great. How we do for time here? We got about 5 more minutes left. This one has to do with roles. It says, can I get roles integrated with my LDAP?
You can, yeah. So I didn't go through the demo too much there. So DreamFactory supports vanilla LDAP and Active Directory. And so that itself is just an API. So you can authenticate and authorize users through LDAP. At a high level, the way it works is DreamFactory has its own native user management system. So you have users and roles. Users can have multiple roles and applications can have multiple roles. So that's very flexible. You can register your end users and tie them to different roles depending on the context of the application itself. And then for AD and LDAP integration, basically DreamFactory inherits the AD roles and the groups and there's syncing mechanisms to do that. But basically, your users will authenticate through AD or LDAP. They'll get a DreamFactory session token, and then their permissions in the DreamFactory context are then governed by the DreamFactory role, which maps back to your AD LDAP user group role management system. So yeah, the integration there is really strong. We have many customers using it. It's pretty much we have obviously very needed use case for any type of real enterprise application development.
Okay, great. The last question we have here is, how do I get access to the Oracle connector?
Yeah, so what you can do there is we have private installers that Bitnami has built, so you can easily trial it on your laptop or on a server. The best thing to do is contact sales@dreamfactory.com directly. You can also go to our website, and there's if you just go and look at the features, there's a whole bunch of places where you can sign up and request a demo, and then that will go through. If you don't want to send an email, you can just go to our website and do that. The other way you can do it, if you don't want to go through any of that, is if you go to dreamfactory.com, you'll see a sign up button. What that's for is we provide a free developer sandboxes. So basically, you can just sign up for an account, and you don't have to install any software or anything. And that actually has all of the connectors. So it has Oracle, so you can play with it. You can actually connect to your on-prem Oracle server, Oracle DBaaS, wherever you're running Oracle, from there for free. And you can do that. You can do it and test it all out and everything, but just beware that's not a production system. So don't build production applications with that. It's a developer sandbox for people to try it out. So those are the two ways.
Okay, we just had a rash of questions that just came in, so I thought we had the last question, but we've got several more.
Sure.
Is there an
Sure.
ODBC source?
We are working on ODBC source. What we found is some of the earlier versions of Oracle, they're basically, at a nutshell, they're different drivers that we can use. We've picked one that works really well for the more modern versions of Oracle. But we will go back and provide ODBC connectors down the line for on-prem databases that are much older. You go back to Oracle 8 and thereabouts. And by the way, it should all work without an ODBC driver, even with the earlier versions of Oracle, but we haven't certified it yet with our QA team. We've basically certified 10, 11, 12 on the version numbers. So roadmap, basically a roadmap feature down the line here.
Okay, there's two questions. I'll just answer these that were basically for people who joined in halfway through, wondering how they can see the content. So this is being recorded. So for those of you who came in late, you will be able to watch the webinar at a time of your choosing. We should have the recording transcoded and up and available within a day or two, and you will receive, everybody who registered will receive an email notification of the recording when it's available. So if you came in halfway through, or you just want to review something and check it out again, you can go ahead and watch the recording. Another question: can DreamFactory work with ADABASE, ADABASE, running the ADABASE SQL gateway? ADABASE SQL gateway. ADABASE SQL gateway.
No.
No.
Sorry, not currently. No.
Okay, great. It was an easy one. Okay, and unfortunately, it may not be the outcome you're looking for, but it was an easy one. Looks like here's the last question for now. Is it possible to integrate with other API management or portal type of products? Example, Apigee.
Yeah, so that's a great question. The answer is yes. And the way we think about it, we're really focused from the API landscape perspective. We're really focused on transactional use cases, basically middleware that you're using to do web development, mobile development, or IoT development, and providing great APIs for all of those app development use cases. We do have some API management, so we have features such as logging that work natively in the platform. That certainly doesn't preclude you from using other API management tools. So there's Apigee, and there's some great open source ones as well, companies like MakeMake. There are a bunch out there. So you can use DreamFactory in tandem with API managers, or you can just use DreamFactory's built-in API management capabilities as well. And we actually sell the Silver product, which has the Oracle, basically the runtime product. We also sell a management console. You can learn about it on our website, DreamFactory Gold product, and that has API management capabilities built into it as well. So it really, really depends on your use case. From the perspective of using APIs that are provided by other vendors, that could be companies that are providing raw APIs, like if you look at Twilio or Stripe and all of those, it's really easy to hook up third-party APIs in DreamFactory. They're just remote HTTP services. So you think about the utility of that. It's getting security and getting APIs exposed in a simple way, and also combining APIs. So you might have Stripe for payments, Twilio for SNS, and then you have an Oracle database, and you need to use all three. And then you need user management and security permissions on top of that. That's a great use case for DreamFactory. So that's kind of in a nutshell. If you have APIs that are managed by some other portal or some other technology, as long as those endpoints are just RESTful endpoints and they have security to them, you can put them in DreamFactory and then utilize them at runtime for application development. That's really the core use case. You need to develop an app. You want to do it quickly and easily. DreamFactory is a great solution for that.
Okay, I thought the questions are still coming in. I thought we had gone through them all, but there's a couple more. What do you do when the user needs more than one role per app?
So if they need more than one role per app, that's a strange scenario. When we don't commonly run across that, so the more common scenario is that you have more than one role per user, and that's generally in the context of multiple apps. So, I'm a person, and then I have different permissions for app 1 than I have for app 2. The other case is that, obviously the application can have multiple roles or different personas of usage, and that's common as well. So the data model is basically you have users can have multiple roles, apps can have multiple roles, therefore users can have multiple roles in different apps. A user having a different role for a different app doesn't really make sense, I don't think, but we could definitely talk about it offline if you have questions. And by the way, my email address here is benbussey with 2 S's at dreamfactory.com, so you can contact me anytime and we can talk through the use case, but that's not one that we would support readily, just because it doesn't seem common from what we've seen from a business perspective.
Great. And then this really is the last one because we're running out of time. Is there a demo application I can play with to dig in a little bit?
Yes, there are. And in fact, what we recommend, I'll just quickly go here one more time if I'm still sharing my screen. So the way to do that, there are these sample apps. So when you get to DreamFactory, these all go out to GitHub repos, which have basically a README, which explains how to get this application running. So if you're doing a Swift application, you can select that one. The README instructions are on GitHub. And then from the backend perspective, when you go through that README, you'll just select the app, and this will basically import the schema and some data records so that you can actually get an app up and running. These apps showcase the basic functionality of the system. So they show you how to do CRUD operations. They show you how to do authentication. It's basically an address book application. So it's kind of, I'd say, an intermediate level. So it's not a hello world, but it's also not something really, really, really complex as well. And this should get you up and running pretty quickly. The other thing I'll mention is our documentation. So if you go to wiki.dreamfactory.com, there are a bunch of basically tutorials that you can look up, and curl examples, and the example applications are also listed here. So that's a really good way to kind of read through. You don't have to read through everything, but I would highly recommend starting out with the example applications and choosing these and have a go at it.
And Ben, those sample apps exist in the open source free version too, right?
They do.
Yeah, so great.
They do.
Yeah, so if you want to try it out, they can just go pick the cloud of your choice, fire it up, and start playing with those, right? Perfect. Okay, well, with that, unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you, everybody who had the great questions. If there is another question you have, again, go ahead and contact Ben. In addition to that, we have the technical resources that Ben had on the screen just a moment ago, so we'll put them up one more time for the recording. And other than that, thank you, Ben. Thank you for your time. And everybody else, have a nice day.
Thank you.